He's so prolific and he's so evocative, I suppose, and just such a wonderful sort of writer that I was really looking forward to seeing what it was, and it made total sense to me that it should be as good and as poetic as it was, I suppose. And it's such a relief. I mean, you end up reading so many scripts that are formulaic and predictable, and by page 30 this happens, and by page 60 this happens. You know, that it was the sort of the very real and unconventional quality to it was really exciting. You know, it was a wonderful piece to read. I was definitely a fan of his music. Not anymore now that I know him, of course. It really made sense to me that someone like Nick should be writing this, because there's a real kind of quality of that he has, I think, that taps into the sort of the real root or the real essence of human nature, and what kind of drives us. I guess the element of survival, and you know, very sort of basic things, but very important things. And I suppose on some level, I mean, I might even look at his songs differently now. You know, I think probably because I know him now as well. But there's definitely a level or an element, I suppose, to this film that feels a little bit like being in a Nick Cave song. John, you know, he's not somebody who's going to tackle something frivolous or certainly not tackle something in a frivolous way. I think he's somebody who's moved by the extremities of life, and the real sort of detail of life, and you know, it feels really right that he and Nick should have collaborated in the way that they have on this. I'm not actually sure how much they collaborated on To Have and to Hold. I know that they had done a bit together on Ghost of the Civil Dead. John is the most level-headed director I've ever worked with. I don't know if he's had a lobotomy or something, but it seems that nothing can fire him up. You know, he's just incredibly rational within this incredibly passionate artistic sort of framework. He's just all-inspiring to me, because he's very caring, he's very sensitive as well, but he really has this great sort of supportive quality that encourages creativity, and I find I really need that. I don't have the strength to kind of work at my best if I'm kind of out there on my own and you know, floating around there trying to make stuff up. And John definitely feels like he wants you part of his team, and off you go together. He's a great inspiration, I have to say. It definitely was very collaborative, not in the sense that, you know, we sort of worked at changing dialogue and, you know, I mean, not so much for me particularly, because I really didn't have a great deal of dialogue in the film, and I feel like on some level I just kind of turned up. I mean, Nick will dispute this, because I certainly asked a lot of questions, but on some level when I look back, I kind of see it almost like I tend to go through this process where I think, oh, I better be asking this and I better be asking that, otherwise I think I might not be considered a real actor or something like that. So you're going to go through all this stuff, and you just sort of dig as much as you possibly can, and on some level, I suppose you have to go through that process to realise that what is really important to you, or to me specifically, is the way I responded to the script the very first time I read it. You know, what actually happened to me after I read it that first time, and sort of while it was sort of resonating, and you know, I spent a couple of days afterwards just kind of going, wow, this is so effective and so evocative. There's no question that it's you know, there's no question of its power and its sort of importance, I suppose. So it was very collaborative. We just became like a really big, great, supportive family to each other. My concerns about being considered a real actor are sort of, I guess, diminishing as I get older, but it's probably an old habit that I got addicted to because I never went to drama school. So I don't know. A lot of people would laugh at that because of what certain drama schools can do to certain people, but I find sometimes that if I sort of fall into that trap sometimes of thinking you've got to do a lot of research. And on some level, it just becomes like too much information. It becomes too much of a heady sort of intellectual process where I feel like I've now got to remember all this additional stuff, when in actual fact, truthfully, what I need to remember is what's kind of going on from here, as I say, sort of based on kind of the initial response I have when I read the thing. On some level, I'd be really interested to do a film where somebody gave me the script the day before and said, this is what it's going to be, off we go tomorrow, don't even learn the lines, just because I think there'd be a sort of a liveliness to that would be kind of interesting. Well, funnily enough, I did a fair amount of research on this film, certainly compared to other things that I've done, because I was actually really fascinated in the period, and John supplied a ton of research for everybody. He supplied all sorts of stuff written, sort of police reports and letters that were written back and forth between people, and there was wonderful historical information about real massacres that occurred and, various reasons why people were dropping dead out in that heat, etc. So there was all sorts of stuff to kind of just dip in and out of. So funnily enough, I actually kind of did do a lot of research on this film. But as I say, I have to get on my feet. I have to start making it be kind of physical and kind of get the voice happening. And so yeah, Danny and I would sit in the car park of the Boulder Opal Motor Inn in Winton and be sitting there together going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, practicing this Irish accent and just having a great laugh. It was actually really important for us to bond, obviously, and really connect. And he's such a delightful guy. He's hilarious. So yeah, we had a good chuckle together. I feel like I want to bond with the other actors anyway, because I feel the more you understand that you're all on the same page, and the more that you can kind of help propel each other forward, the more respect there is and the more support you feel. And so whether or not you're sort of playing brothers with somebody, or whether it's somebody who's playing your next door neighbour or whatever it happens to be, I like to try and connect with the people that I'm working with anyway. I think probably more so if you're playing brothers and you've had a real history together, because the people that I know, there's a family that I know, one of my best friends at home is one of 3 brothers, and there's such unspoken stuff between them when you watch them interact. And it's a little bit like playing drunk. The interesting thing about drunk people is that they're trying to act sober the whole time. So on some level, when you're playing somebody's brother, you need to just let go that you're actually brothers. You just need to kind of be with each other and be completely comfortable with each other. And so, I think the time that we'd spent, Danny and I early on was getting sort of Richard Wilson, who was playing young Mikey, on the phone and talking to him desperately, waiting for him to arrive in Winton. I was just really awestruck by the sort of the audacity, I suppose, of such a proposition, of such a just horrendous idea. I think that, and really drawn to it because, I don't know, I'm sort of really drawn to rather tragic, extreme things, I suppose, in a way. So I was really interested in what almost the chemical reaction would be within oneself having been put in that situation. What, I think with adrenaline and all sorts of things that happen to us when we are in extreme situations, I find that really fascinating, and how we choose to respond and what emotionally occurs. And it was so extreme, but so, as I say, the way Nick wrote the script, it was very blunt, very sort of straightforward, very kind of almost cold, but very beautiful and honest as well, that it was one of those things you just kind of couldn't put it down. And I still don't I don't think it'll be something that I could ever actually have an answer for anyway. How would you deal with such a proposition? I mean, I just hope that I never would have to, you know. I find generally people are kind of morally ambiguous anyway in real life. You know, we sort of dip in and out of, you know, being on the high ground and, you know, doing something a bit sneaky or whatever. And so that just feels very real to me to tap into that. I mean, I certainly don't want to. I don't want to become the ambivalent guy, you know, forever. So it's nice to have a bit of direction at times and a bit of certainty. But I definitely find that probably something that I can tap into relatively easily. The extremity of the temperature and just the kind of the unusual nature of the landscape was all so sort of overwhelming when we first got to Winton. I was so awestruck by it, and I just love it. I really love being out in that part of Australia. It's really, it's just fascinating, and it really kind of reminds you of how, you know, unimportant, or if you want to put it like that, we actually can be. It's a real reminder of sort of balancing things out, I guess. So as difficult as it is to be in that kind of heat, it's also really helpful in figuring out, not even figuring out, but just kind of working out how you play what you're going to play. There's just a certain, it's like sort of putting you into sort of mud, and there's only a certain way you can kind of get through the mud, you know. And I love that. I mean, it almost feels a little bit like talking about sort of being lazy, you know. The more stuff you are offered, like the landscape and the temperature and the costume, this and the other, the less I have to try and do. And I don't want to be trying to do anything when I'm working. I want to just be sort of swept along with it and try and remain sort of real in the situation. So when the situation is that powerful, it's exciting. Like most Australians, I had a sort of vague, whitewashed version of what the history had been, particularly, you know, the sort of white settlement. And I definitely learnt a lot more in looking at the stuff that we read than I already knew. And really, I mean, I think I intuitively had a feeling that everything we'd learnt at school was not quite true. So it was really heart-wrenching, but really informative and really wonderful to actually kind of get a real insight into how things really were on some level there. And I wouldn't profess to know a great deal by any means, but just to get a real sense of the brutality of it. You know, and on some level, it just makes me more irritated by the government that we have at the moment, who still sort of, you know, whitewashes over the reality of the situation. So. It's amazing though to really to try and understand and get a sense of what it was like for people in that day, trying to survive in sort of the only way they knew how, you know.